Ahoj, tak všichni online?
Jo.
Taky.
A ty, babi?
Babi.
Babi, musíš tam na to kliknout.
Ne, na to druhý.
Vypadáváš.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to the opening ceremony of the 14th edition of the Echoes of the One World International Human Rights Documentary Film Festival in Brussels. My name is Jourová, and I'm one of the coordinators of the One World in Brussels Festival. This year is very different, very special. Normally, we would be now meeting in the lovely cinema hall of the Beaux-Arts Center for Fine Arts, and then we would continue meeting in other cinemas and institutions around Brussels. But it's not like that this year. We are organizing the festival for you online from our office in Prague. So it is very different for us. I was thinking about which background I should choose for my moderation, and I decided to go with the as real as it is, the authentic one. And that is how we are organizing the festival for you this year. So behind me is our lovely technician, Jakub Hanuš, who will be preparing all the live streams. And I would like to also introduce my dear colleague from People in Need, from the Human Rights Department, Vesna Evans, who is also the coordinator of One World in Brussels. For the next few days, you will have the opportunity to watch live streams of documentary films, followed by discussion from today to June 4th. The live streams with films and discussions will be only available across Belgium, but will be also streaming on Facebook and YouTube, and these streams will be available worldwide. The One World in Brussels is organized by People in Need, together with the Czech Center Brussels. I would like to thank our dear colleagues from the Czech Center Brussels, because they have put a lot of energy into the organization, and without them, we would not be able to make this event happen. So thanks to them. I would also like to thank our second partner, the European Parliament, who has helped us a lot this year, and the permanent representation of the Czech Republic to the EU, who's also been helping with the promotion of the festival a lot. The festival is held under the auspices of Edita Hrdá, the permanent representative of the Czech Republic to the EU, and Věra, Jourová, Vice President of the European Commission for Values and Transparency. This particular event tonight is also done in cooperation with the Beaux-Arts Center for Fine Arts, the European Parliament, and the International Federation for Human Rights. As for the course of this evening, we will start with a few introductory remarks from speakers. These will be followed by a short keynote from Maria Arena, who is the chair of the European Parliament Subcommittee on Human Rights. After that, there will be a discussion connected to this year's theme, which is Connection Lost. The topic will be freedom of speech and security in the digital era. And after, I would like to invite you for the opening film of the festival, which is Coded Bias by Shalini Kantaya. And it is a very interesting film about facial recognition and how artificial intelligence can actually be very biased. Now, I would like to start with a video message from the Executive Director of People in Need, Šimon Pánek, who unfortunately cannot be here with us live today as he is traveling, but he sent us a little video with welcoming remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome at the opening of the One World Film Festival Brussels. This is the 14th edition in Brussels and 23rd edition of the same festival just finished in the Czech Republic. I'm happy that I can introduce the theme of this year. It's a connection lost. This is the words which we heard during the last 15 months very often in our work, but also in the private life. Of course, we make a big step forward in the digitalization of our work where the nature of the work permit, but these are also words which say that we are losing a bit of the human-to-human connections. I am in northern Iraq and the connection is often lost here, so I decided just to greet you through this few minutes of a pre-recorded video instead of try to be online, which is very difficult. This year's theme of the festival also brings a couple of films from difficult countries with typical human rights content, and I think you will find them extremely interesting. The festival is organized by the People in Need, which is a Czech humanitarian and human rights organization working elsewhere, for example here, and as always in cooperation with the European Parliament, with the Czech Cultural Center Brussels and with the Czech Permanent Representation. For us in People in Need, combination of the humanitarian work in some of the most difficult places around the globe with the human rights, civil society, defenders support, it's genuine combination, because we went through the very unfree and unfortunate decade, so human rights, freedoms and values connected with the dignity and freedom of people are extremely important. Either it is in conflict, in poverty, or because their rights and freedoms are oppressed by the authoritarians and dictators, which we unfortunately can see more and more as business as usual around the globe. I'm happy to announce that this year festival in Brussels is under the auspices of Věra, Jourová, the Vice President of the European Commission for Values and Transparency, and Edita Hrdá, Ambassador, Head of the Czech representation to EU. You have a few days where you can see the films online, not of course just only in Brussels, but from anywhere in Belgium, plus the few debates. The first debate will take place just in few minutes after the speakers, and the title is the Freedom of Speech and Security in the Cyber Era. And after that there will be an opening film, Coded Bias, again showing how the digitalization, the artificial intelligence and the all new world, which is starting to be almost the same important as the physical world, can be complicated, and that the bias we can find even in a digital or cyberspace. Thank you very much for attending. Please say the word around about the One World Film Festival in Brussels this year, and I wish you a very interesting and inspiring evening. Thank you.
So we thank to Šimon Pánek for his kind words. And now I would like to pass the word to Jitka Pánek-Pírková, the Director of Czech Center, Brussels. Jitka, the floor is yours.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me be very brief, very personal, and a little bit sentimental. I'm here tonight with you as my first public engagement after giving birth to my little daughter just 2 months ago. And as any parent would probably testify, parenting really makes you appreciate more both the present moment and the horizon of the future. Therefore, I'm extremely happy that we can once again, with the Czech Center Brussels, help to realize this amazing festival that really gives voice and pays tribute to people who get engaged, often with their lives and with really high stakes for the sake of our future, be it on the field of freedom of speech, cybersecurity, human rights as a broad term. These are really the heroes of our future. So let me thank once again the people in need that worked hard to realize the festival even in this year's constrained conditions. Of course, my wonderful team in the Czech Center Brussels. Of course, all the partners, especially the permanent representation of the Czech Republic to the EU, BOZAR, European Parliament, and others. I'm really more than ever persuaded that it is important to keep our eyes on the horizon of the future. So thank you so much for having me tonight, and I wish you all an enriching discussion and a really good experience with all the festival. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jitka, for your kind words, and it's lovely to see you after such a long time. Now I would like to introduce Her Excellency Edita Hrda, who is the head of the permanent representation of the Czech Republic to the EU. Please, the floor is yours.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to have the chance to welcome you this evening to this discussion and to all these lovely festival, One World Festival. After 1 year of break, we were a bit forced by the pandemic, and we can this time only present it in virtual form, but I think it's worth to do it, and I'm very happy that we were able to organize it. And as Šimon Pánik said, a lot of people which can visit, a lot of us which can join it. Unfortunately, the human rights situation is not getting much better in these days. It's a bit deteriorating also as a result of the COVID pandemics. And of course, of the measures taken by the governments to protect health, and it had impact on our lives. We will not stop human rights violations like waving a magic wand, and we must constantly strive to uphold them, talk about them, draw attention to them, show very concrete cases. And this is what this festival and these movies do. Human rights are, as you know, at the heart of the EU external action, which is why the EU is also pushing for human rights to be in the center of global reconstruction efforts following the pandemics. And to support the human rights, the EU has a number of tools, and one of our disposal, the EU disposal, in the last days is also such one as a new human rights sanctions regime. So I very much hope we will enjoy. I will not take more time for my speeches because I think everybody really wishes to be part of the discussion and part of the movies and watch it and enjoy it. So only to say, have a pleasant few days, and I very much hope that next year we will meet in person again in whatever premises in Brussels. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I also hope we'll meet in Brussels live next year and it will be possible again. Now I would like to ask for the video pre-recorded keynote speech by Maria Arena, who unfortunately cannot be here live tonight. She's the chair of the European Parliament Subcommittee on Human Rights. Let's watch our short video.
Dear guests, my name is Maria Arena. I'm elected here in Brussels for the European Parliament, and I'm chairing the Subcommittee of Human Rights. First, I really regret not to be with you today, but I'm happy to give you this message. I welcome you to this year Brussels edition of the One World Human Rights Film Festival, organized by the NGO People in Need in partnership with the European Parliament. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic forced us all to go online for our professional life, but also for our private life. It has been really challenging for all, but it has been unbearable. It is unbearable for a lot of people living in poor conditions and also living in countries with authoritarian governments. In our Human Rights Subcommittee, we have been following with concern the negative impact for human rights and democracy and on activists under pressure during this COVID-19 situation. And in the European Parliament, we decided to give them the opportunity to speak in the European Parliament, remotely, of course, but we invited them to give them the voice to testimony about the situation in their country. So we received activists from Hong Kong, Pakistan, India, Belarus, and a lot of other countries. And we also, we know, because we know that some authoritarian countries use the pandemic situation as an excuse to increase the crackdown on human rights and on state of law. We also push for the adoption of the new global sanction regime against grave violation of human rights. And we also work on due diligence regulation to make sure that companies are not using this situation, using the violation of human rights to be more competitive. So for us at the European Parliament, it is important to continue to closely follow the human rights situation around the globe. And one of these instruments is also the Sakharov Prize. The Sakharov Prize is to give a prize to an individual or an organization that has fight for the freedom of thought and the freedom of this democracy. Each year, we award this prize to one person or an individual, but we also, in the long term, more long term, support Sakharov Fellowship and Sakharov Network. For example, the film Last Chance for Justice, screened next Friday, has been made by one of our Sakharov Fellows. I'm not going to speak about the film, but it shows that it is necessary to build a kind of solidarity between the ones who are fighting for these human rights. So for me, it's important to be here with you and to guarantee that we are part of this community. And I know that you are part of the community because you are there. And so I hope that next year we will be together in person. So I hope you a good screening and also to participate on the different debates that you will have the opportunity to see. Thank you very much and see you soon.
Thanks, Maria Arena. And this will be all from my side. I'll soon pass the word to the moderator of the panel discussion, Monika Ladmanová, who is the advisor of the Vice President of the European Commission, Věra, Jourová. And I would just like to add one small thing. We have a lot of local partners in Brussels who have helped us tremendously with the organization. They're usually partnering for specific screenings, helping the speakers, moderating the discussions. So a big thanks goes to them as well. It's so many that I can't even name them and it would take a long time, but I just want to say we really appreciate their help. So enjoy the evening and join us for other screenings of the One World in Brussels 2021.
Thank you, Julia, for giving me the floor, or rather the screen. Good evening also from my part, everybody. It feels good to be part of this respected event, One World Film Festival, which we had a chance to follow for several years already here in Brussels. So my name is Monika Ladmanová, and I serve my 7th year here in Brussels as an advisor and member of the cabinet of Commissioner for Justice and Equality, and now Vice President for Values and Transparency. And my area of expertise is equality, human rights, democracy, and citizens' engagement. And the theme of this year's festival is Connection Lost. And the theme for our today's discussion is freedom of speech and security in the digital era. And I am really pleased to introduce the greatest panelists we have for our discussion tonight. And here I would like to welcome Professor of Law Sharon Home, who is an Executive Director of Human Rights in China. It's a Chinese non-governmental organization promoting fundamental rights and freedom. Sharon is a long-term advocate for human rights, including in the digital age. Welcome, Sharon. And next, let me welcome Eliška Pírková, who is a policy analyst for Europe at Access Now, an organization fighting for human rights in the digital age. And Eliška is a great expert on various digital technologies and fundamental rights related topics. Welcome, Eliška. Last but not least, let me welcome Marcel Kolaja, the Vice President of the European Parliament, who is also a member of the Czech Pirates Party. It's a liberal progressive political party, joining the Greens political fraction in the European Parliament. And Marcel represents here the views of those who stand for open technologies, freedom on the internet, independence of media, and transparency. Welcome to you as well, Marcel.
Good evening.
During our discussion, all of you who are watching or listening have chance to pose your questions, and you have 3 ways how to do it, how you can ask. It can be through the Facebook. You can use the space for comments under the video. You can do the same at YouTube in case you are watching us in this channel. And you can also do it via Slido if you are watching us via the platform One World Online. So you should see on your screen more info how to do it. But now let's go directly to the theme. So we are living in an exceptional times, and here I'm not talking about the pandemic, of which I hope to forget, at least for this very evening, but about the digital revolution we lived through in the past 2 or 3 decades. And the revolution which has a tremendous impact on our lives, on the way we work, we do business, we do politics, on the way we organize our private relationships, or the way how we communicate among each other. While this means a lot of opportunities, it has its weaknesses, and digitalization challenges our fundamental rights. And with recent developments, I dare to say that it challenges our democratic system and its core. Unequal access to internet, or rather controlled access, abuse of private data, algorithmic manipulation of behavior, which can lead ultimately to changes in the geopolitical arrangements, and we see it around us. Discriminatory biases transferred to the machines run by artificial intelligence, cyberbullying, fake news, questionable behavior of big tech platforms. These are just few phenomena which require our attention, and inevitably also some policy solutions. So to start with, I would like to ask my fellow panelists a question framing the context in which we operate. And I would like to start with Eliška Pírková. How do you see the current state of play concerning digitalization and human rights in Europe and maybe even worldwide?
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight. This is my 2nd edition of One World Festival, and I'm very honored that I'm being invited to participate also in its Brussels edition. And this is a great question to start with, even though I don't want to be the one who will draw this very grim picture for the present, or maybe potentially for the future, hopefully not. But coming from a position of human rights global organization that operates in 6 world regions, we see a very special time for digital rights and fundamental rights and freedom in online space, and not always in a good way. And I would perhaps start with very concrete examples that we have witnessed in recent weeks, especially in the context of social unrest and demonstrations and fight for the basic human rights. The first example could be the case of Palestine, where we actually saw that suddenly pro-Palestinian content has been widely taken down by large media, social media platforms, or very large online platforms, to put it more into the EU language. Many of you probably caught many news, including the hashtag Save Sheikh Jarrah, which is the very disputed neighborhood in East Jerusalem. And these content just started disappearing, specifically following these very specific type of hashtags. Another example, pretty much in the same week, appeared in Canada, where we actually saw that the content of activists, young female activists predominantly, who are supporting the movements around missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and seeking the justice for them, their content started disappearing also due to the similar hashtag that these groups, activists and human rights defenders have been using in order to raise the awareness about this ongoing, deeply disturbing issue in the country. And finally, we saw something very similar happening in Colombia around the anti-government demonstrations, where specifically the hashtag national strike and the content under these hashtags also started disappearing and being restricted by these very large online platforms. And all of this happened in the span of 1 month. The initial explanations of very large online platforms was that this is just a technical glitch, but it's a technical glitch that has a far-reaching consequences, especially for human rights defenders and historically oppressed marginalized groups. Why is that? So this is probably a consequence of different algorithmic curation and content moderation that very large online platforms deploy. We cannot know exactly what's actually happening on these platforms because they are notoriously non-transparent and they still keep escaping the public scrutiny and oversight, which is absolutely necessary. What, however, this points out to is that on one hand, these groups are being marginalized, and their voices are being significantly silenced by these platforms that often replace the state and function as a quasi-judicial bodies deciding on what stays online and what goes offline. And this points out to a clearly obvious democratic deficit that we are currently facing and that our moderator already correctly underlined in her introductory speech. These tools that are being deployed by platforms often impose prior restrictions on the freedom of expression of these groups, which is deeply problematic from an international human rights framework. And if we put it to the analogy as what we actually understand under prior censorship in the traditional sense, that means more in the connection to the state parties, it would be a system of administrative prior censorship that actually bring the speech into too much control of the government. But in this case, the logic actually shifts. It's too much control of online platforms that might even have or cooperate with some authoritarian regimes that actually have the interest in suppressing the dissent and opposing voices. And obviously, when censorship becomes convenient tool, it becomes too common. Now, we also need to acknowledge the fact that there is a lot of discriminatory bias inherent in automated tools that is being used also for content moderation and content curation. And after this debate, you will watch a documentary, Coded Bias, that is pointing to more the facial recognition technology and the use of biometric data. But we observe the same discriminatory bias in machine learning systems that ultimately determine how the free speech is being regulated in online space. And there are several examples of their contextual blindness when they actually generate a lot of false positives and false negatives, often targeting historically oppressed and marginalized groups. And due to their contextual blindness, for instance, they are completely unable to assess issues such as intersectional discrimination that many members of non-binary community or LGBTQI+ face on a regular basis. And we witnessed all over and over again how the tools deployed by the very large online platforms seeking to protect these groups actually turn against them and silence their voices even more by restricting their content because they simply misunderstand the context in which that content is being posted on the platforms. I know that I don't have too much time. I have 5 minutes, so I'm trying to be very, very concise, because there is so much that we could actually discuss. But I think especially this democratic deficit that I have already mentioned is extremely important for the groups, that actually not only that they are often unsafe in the online environment, they are also unwilling, due to these discriminatory consequences, to participate in public discourse. And especially for the groups that are already voiceless within majoritarian societies, this can have a disastrous consequences. That would be for the start. Thank you very much for the floor, and I look forward to a vivid debate on the topic.
Thank you, Eliška. So this democratic deficit, censorship given by the private companies rather, and then followed also by the authoritarian regimes, manipulation and discrimination. These are the highlights, I would say, from your opening statement. And I would like to turn to Marcel Kolaja, if you would define the major challenges, be it for Europe or broader, when it comes to the digitalization in the same words, and what response you might offer as a policymaker to these.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the invitation and for organizing the festival in Brussels. It is a great tradition, and I'm happy that the festival has found its regular, but I also hope new viewers. The protection of digital rights is at the center of my parliamentary work, so I am really glad that I can discuss these topics with you and with my co-speakers. The threat that the misuse of technologies can pose is not relevant only to journalists and human rights defenders, but to everyone. As the movie about discrimination by algorithm that we will see suggests too, we have to realize that discrimination by algorithms is happening already today. Let's look at some of the concrete examples from our daily lives. Some companies use software to evaluate received CVs. These systems are taught on specific data sets. And if we don't make sure that those data sets are not discriminatory, we cannot be surprised if, in the end, the system is not objective. Already in 2018, Amazon announced resigning from using such software, which inclined to discrimination of female candidates. So how could that have happened? The system needs to be fed with data. When the data set builds on the current and past leaders and managers in history, such a system can come to the conclusion that women are less suitable for manager positions because historically there were fewer of them compared to men. For another example, imagine a real estate agency offering apartments in a lucrative neighborhood online. If the rules are not placed well, such offers may be displayed only to people of a particular racial or social profile. And in that case, since the discriminated people are not even displayed the offers, they do not even know that they are being discriminated, and it is more difficult for them to fight that. And not only the level of companies, but also state institutions must be carefully considered. For instance, the police. An algorithm analyzing the crime rate in specific neighborhoods and deciding the distribution of police forces may lead to uneven distribution of police forces that is discriminatory. It is clear that the more police forces are deployed in a particular area, the more illegal activities are discovered. And the less police forces are deployed in another area, the more illegal activities remain unknown to the police. And this bias feeds the algorithm, resulting in an even bigger bias, and the story goes on. Hence, in the end, there may be areas that are over-policed while others remain hardly covered by the police forces. The European institutions are now working on regulation of the usage of artificial intelligence. We need to make sure that the AI systems, which have a great impact on lives of individuals, are verified, audited, and checked before being deployed. Also, artificial intelligence is the technology that stays behind facial recognition systems, which are the subject of the movie we will watch tonight. The European pirates have been advocating a ban on the use of such systems in public space because of the human rights implications, especially in countries where the rule of law is in a bad condition. Eliška already mentioned the issues in Israel and Palestine, and Sharon will talk about China. Worrying stories are coming from other countries, though, as well. There are witnesses confirming that authoritarian countries such as Bahrain and Azerbaijan combine the information from social networks with facial recognition systems to persecute political dissidents and members of the LGBT community, for instance. Technology will help our society to flourish only if it is in hands under and under control of its users. And that brings me to another topic that the European Parliament is now working on: the regulation of functioning of internet platforms. As we can hear in the speeches often in the European Parliament, we want to make sure that what is illegal offline is also illegal online. I always add that what is legal offline must be legal online too. We find ourselves in a situation in which internet platforms such as Facebook or Twitter have the power to put limitations to freedom of speech online and to decide what information is displayed, to whom it is distributed, and what is deleted. They have grown into some kind of public agora with enormous outreach, with the only regulator themselves. And that is a dangerous case of privatization of control over the freedom of speech. Elimination of independent authorities, such as courts, from the decision over someone's online freedoms, if you will. At the beginning of the year, a few social network accounts of Donald Trump were suspended. And Donald Trump is no doubt a controversial person, which I have no intention to defend, quite the opposite. However, without setting an appropriate system of checks and balances, we would wake up one day in the reality where it is not Donald Trump whose accounts are suspended, but someone who fights for a good cause. Thank you for the invitation once again, and I'm looking forward to the subsequent debate on this topic.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcel, for your opening remarks. So the data sets are of importance, but you agreed with your pre-speaker that the privatization of the internet and the freedom of speech is quite dangerous here. You also mentioned the role of the regulation and who should be in charge of doing that. And now we will hear from Sharon Home, who has maybe a different experience with the legislation when it comes to digitalization and technologies. And Sharon, let's share your view, because you've been around in the human rights business for quite some time. And we wonder what's your assessment of the danger the technologies are posing to human rights, but maybe also, as I've mentioned, including some legislation imposed, given that this is imposed also by different regimes.
Thank you so much, Monika. It is really a pleasure and an honor to follow Madam Arena's keynote remarks and to join the discussion of this panel. As a lifelong film avid fan, it's a special treat to be part of the opening of this film festival and discussion. I want to say, though, if it's okay, Monika, I'd like to open up a little bit broader the aperture as a context for some remarks about the festival, movies as technology, and then facial recognition, and perhaps segue, hopefully at the end, into the film screening discussion. Today in the US, it's a national holiday, Memorial Day, which was established 150 years ago to memorialize the Civil War in the US. And today is also the 100th anniversary of the massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was the total burning down and destruction of what was then known as Black Wall Street. So I think today is a very special moment to have this discussion, and for the film that shows embedded racial bias. But it's also a film festival that we're opening. And the cinematic universe today, I would say the whole ecosystem of creative and business, the end of the production and distribution, this is a key cultural battleground for freedom of expression against a larger geopolitical background of China's global ambitions to control the domestic and international narratives and to censor any expression, any film, any video, any digital product that it perceives as critical. And I do want to say just quickly to give some examples. Do Not Split, the 2020 American-Norwegian documentary short film that was directed by Anders Hammer about the 2019-2020 Hong Kong protest, was nominated by the Academy Award for Best Documentary Short Subject. The Hong Kong media outlet that had broadcasted the Academy Award for 50 years for the first time would not carry the award ceremony, citing, quote, purely commercial reasons. 10 years, the series of short films depicting a dystopian future in which Hong Kong's freedoms, language, and identity are forcibly taken away by China. This was 2015, the film. It envisioned that that future would come in 2025. We're actually there. Was attacked by Global Times, the official mouthpiece, as, quote, a virus of the mind, and, quote, absurd. And despite being sold out at every single screening, which was unprecedented, it was suddenly removed from all screens. And what citizens did and what Hong Kongers do was to organize community screenings, including open air screenings with discussions with the directors. And despite references that the words 10 years were banned, it was nominated for Best Picture at the 2016 Hong Kong Film Awards. And it was one of the most exciting moments when the director said, and the winner is, and said the two banned words, 10 years. The most recent example I'd like to share is that the US actor John Cena has had to profusely apologize to Chinese fans last week after saying in an interview, Taiwan would be the first country that would see the latest 9, I can't believe it, Fast and Furious films. And joining a long line of international celebrities and companies, airlines, hotels, designers, apologizing to China, he said, I made a mistake. I love, love, love. I respect, respect, respect China and the Chinese people. This was in very terrible Putonghua, which was even worse than when a Cantonese person speaks Putonghua. And this is not surprising in the digital space or the physical world, because China's movie market for 2020 hit 1.7 billion, and it overtook the US. I emphasize this because we're talking about films, but it's also where we're talking about trade, investment, and trade-offs with human rights. So beyond that, there's a whole universe. There are, in the 850 million internet users, the daily active usage of Douyin, which is the Chinese version of kind of like TikTok, in 2020 was 600 million users per day. So I want to put that data point out there. And as part of the propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation campaigns, harking back to the Cultural Revolution, the Chinese authorities have been posting self-confessions, a kind of upgrade, and rights defense lawyers, and in the face of international condemnation, has been posting video testimonials of Uyghurs on the benefits of the re-education camp experience. So rights online and offline are under severe attack. It's well beyond democracy deficits. We're talking about an all-out assault. COVID-19, the digital transformation that affects the way the world is studying and working and connecting, and has exposed serious inequalities and exacerbated the difficulties of those living in authoritarian regimes like China, as highlighted by Madam Arena. China has embraced technology for its economic development, but as the tool for comprehensive social control. And like other regimes, leverage the pandemic, citing the necessity of protecting public health to crack down on civil society and restrict the peaceful exercise of rights, including freedom of expression, access to information, and freedom of assembly. Within an overall securitized framework of the party state, the national security law for Hong Kong was passed last year in June. Today, 47 individuals that were charged with conspiracy to commit subversion on February 28th last month for helping to organize a primary, an unofficial primary, of which nearly 610,000 Hong Kongers, an unprecedented number, participated. Last Friday, on May 28th, 10 democracy figures, lawyers, former legislators, were sentenced over organizing unauthorized national protests on October 1st, 2019. They all received prison sentences and have been remanded. Among the 10, 8 are facing another trial in June over unauthorized June 4th candlelight vigil last year. So they're also facing different charges on other various peaceful exercise of rights during the 2019. By way of segueing to the conclusion and the final points I want to make, I want to start by saying that citizens, despite everything I've just said, can control and reclaim the narrative space. We can document abuses. We can create and produce evidence, even in the face of this severe democracy deficits. And in part, it's the digitalization of video. It's the digitalization of media, because thousands of videos were produced during the 2019-2020 protests, when the authorities were saying, listen to what we say, not what your eyes tell us. Well, thousands of Hong Kongers saw the brutal police abuses, and they didn't believe the whitewash police report. Shalini Kantaya's Coded Bias, the opening film that's going to be screening tonight, explores this fallout of racial bias that's embedded in facial recognition algorithms. And as Marcel has outlined, these are inevitably flawed developments and deployments of technology, just like the flawed humans who created and deployed them, the discriminatory race and gender bias, et cetera. And the new legislation with AI, my only, and perhaps that would be for the discussion, my concern there is that the speed and rate and complexity of AI development is so fast that unless we're supercomputers, I'm not sure we're going to be able to keep up. China's AI moment came in 2016. It was its wake-up moment, and that was when AlphaGo, the computer program, beat the world Go master, and that was by acting not like a predictive algorithm, by acting like something creative, something that was beyond any of its creators. So I have two concerns about AI. You know, will we make it or will it remake us as humans? But the second thing is there is potential in studios like DeepMind that are really addressing the ethical, legal, technological, complex clump of issues about how we can ensure that AI is a force for good. So this embedded, let me say a short note on the mainland legislation, particularly related to facial recognition. And there is one that is a draft right now on facial recognition, the requirements, and that is now open for comment. This is the second draft through June 22nd. And the other one I just want to flag is the Personal Information Protection Law for China. This is in its second draft, and the consultation period for the second draft ended on Friday. And the only thing I would say, and we can get into more in discussion quickly, is that both these laws include extensive normative language. that includes consent of the users, the data holders, the minimization, the data handlers. They have the minimization principles in terms of collection and storage. And what I want to say about that is, no matter what it says at normative formal requirements for the protection of rights and privacy, it is within like all mainland laws, it's within its legal system that is not a rule of law, but a rule by law in which the party interests are supreme. Let me close by saying that this film festival will end on June 4th. And this year is the 32nd anniversary of the military crackdown, the bloody crackdown in 1989 on the democracy movement. And despite 32 years, it's important to know that, and to keep in mind, that ongoing impunity encourages and enables ongoing abuses. So this year, I know that the theme is connection lost, but I'd like to suggest that it also can be reclaiming our connections in the digital space. And in that spirit, I'd like to share with all of the viewers and the people beyond Hong Kong is that we can't be in Victoria Park this year because once again, it's being off limits and we're not even sure what will happen. But we will be compiling an online collection of images. Please contribute. Organizers in Hong Kong and abroad have asked at 8 p.m. on June 4th that you light a candle and that you do any other way you want to remember and take a picture and send it to us, and we will post it in this gallery. We will be posting today new profiles in our project that was started in 2019, The Unforgotten. This includes the youngest victim who was killed, bringing the total to 85 profiles. All the information about these lives were based on the incredible work done by the Tiananmen mothers over decades, tracking down the families of victims and survivors. This is so that how they lived and how they died, and it matters that they're remembered. And for decades now, today, we will be issuing an essay, an English translation by the Tiananmen mothers, who has been doing it every year. And while I cannot be in Victoria Park this year, I will be joining the activist group Lion Rock Cafe and New Yorkers for Hong Kong for a candlelight vigil in Washington Square Park in New York. So I want to invite everyone to join us in digital solidarity. And so connections are indeed tragically, painfully lost, but I do think we can reconnect.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you very much for bringing up these examples also of the historical events linked to what's happening today. And thank you for your call for action on the 4th of June. So everybody, again, 8 p.m., take a picture with a lighted candle and send it to Sharon and her organization for acknowledgement of what happened at Tiananmen in 1989. So you also raised an important issue of how can citizens reclaim their rights, and that there is a way, that there is not a lost hope like this connection lost, that we still have chance to build and to establish for the kind of democratic digital world. But I still wonder how to do it. What are the solutions which can be imposed? And it could be from the policymakers. We've already heard from the member of the parliament, but also from the citizens themselves. And Marcel, you used the word users, and here I allow myself to quote Sharon from one of her recent speeches, where I think she also posed this provocative term that the users is really term used only in the two connections, and this is with the drugs and with the internet. So I think that it also says something, and it has inside a huge complex kind of space where I think we can discuss the consequences. So without further delay, Eliška, what do you think? How can the civic movement, and because you are in the front line in bringing up the rights of people and helping the defenders of rights, how can we normal citizens engage and make sure that the digital world is democratic? Tell us.
Wow, that's a huge question. So I would maybe, before I'll tackle this one, I would like to go briefly to what has already been discussed and connected to this question. So I absolutely agree with the idea that what is illegal offline should be illegal online, but I often I hear much less, especially from policymakers and legislators, saying that the human rights that are being protected offline have to be equally protected online. And I think that's also continuation of that sentence that needs to be underlined and emphasized. I think Sharon raised an important issue, and something that European legislators also have to keep in mind, that many of the ideas and solutions about empowering the users, going back to your question, also are very much built up on this presumption that we have functioning rule of law in the majority of European countries, and that we have these Bill of Rights enshrined in our constitution and constitutional tradition of member states, so something that we can actually fall back on. There are, however, countries where human rights defenders, activists, marginalized group, you name it, cannot possibly rely on the state because the state is the perpetrator of human rights violation. And another important aspect that was mentioned, and I think it's really connected to the argument of democratic deficit and how can be actually media or social media useful, is precisely the documentation of human rights abuse online, which, you know, organizations such as Syrian Archives or Witness, that's pretty much their main mandate. And we see also International Criminal Court to gradually use these kind of materials as the evidence. So this is just to quickly reflect on those few points that was said. And the issue of the data sets and how machine learnings are being trained and on what data and how this is actually being tested, if that is ever being tested throughout the whole life cycle of the machine, those are other issues that the policymakers have to grapple with at the moment. But I think how to empower online users and what we can do, it's very difficult to start with, because you as an online user or as a recipient of the service, as the Digital Services Act, the proposal from the European Commission is actually calling users, you are in an extremely power asymmetry relationship to a very powerful online platforms that actually have unprecedented access to your data and that very much treat you as a commodity. This is not always necessarily an evil intention, but it's simply the result of the business models and the architecture which is within the fabric of how these platforms function. And I think that's very difficult because it starts with your awareness as a user, that you are actually fully aware of some algorithmic content curation happening in the background. Many users are not. And this is not to say, by the way, that every single curation or moderation has to necessarily violate your basic human rights, because it also can enhance your experience as a user. But for you to just get interested in other platforms is already being, to some extent, negatively influenced, because there is no other Facebook at the moment, there is no other Instagram. And there are alternatives to WhatsApp that we are seeing taking off, such as Signal, but it's still quite a minority of users. And even if you want to go and migrate somewhere else, all your families and friends and everyone is actually on those platforms. So you will leave a huge amount of data behind, which is not always given that you can actually take them and go somewhere else. Now, the policymakers at the EU level are already addressing these issues. There are many ideas around interoperability, for instance, currently under Article of the Digital Market Act, which is another big revolutionary step in terms of regulation. But we have to see how this will actually play out in practice and whether this will truly actually lead to this user-centric design that we have in mind. And not even speaking of interface design solutions, nudging of users, dark patterns, and so on and so forth, which is also something that we work on. So on one hand, my suggestion would be just be aware, be informed, seek more information. If you can, opt for maybe smaller platforms. If you have that possibilities, at least try, and just be interested. Try to actually don't just stay on Facebook because everyone is there, which is very easy to say. So each time when I'm being asked this question, it's quite difficult for me to answer that because I also understand the practicalities of those solutions, and it's up to the legislators and human rights activists and advocates to convince legislators to actually adopt those user-centric solutions. But one more thing, because I don't want to just blackmouth the very large online platforms throughout this whole contribution of mine. I think that if recent weeks learned, like if we learn something, it's that yes, platforms are dominant, they can have negative impact over public discourse, but ultimately the Institute of Violence is always immediately available and accessible and enforced by states. So we need to just take care of our democratic principles and the rule of law and not to take them for granted, because it can go wrong very quickly. And I think especially with the rights such as data protection, privacy, or freedom of expression, when the majority or the majoritarian population will start realizing that they're actually being restricted and that we are losing them and something is not all right, it's usually too late. So be responsible citizens, be aware.
Thank you, Eliška, for your comprehensive response. And I think that you can be critical about the platforms here in this environment, I dare to say. But thanks for reminding that not everywhere in Europe, even the rule of law and the principles can be taken for granted. So we have to always consider that environment under which we are operating. Meantime, there are several questions coming from the audience, and I would like to use them and maybe ask Marcel Kolaja, because you've mentioned the regulation on the AI, and there is a question, should you know, what is the reaction of the AI industry to the planned EU regulation, and should we expect any backlash, and what it could look like? So are you aware of the sectorial response to the proposed regulation?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I need to say that we are only at the start of legislating the AI regulation in the European Parliament. So there were not many opportunities to gather feedback from the AI industry. And I also need to say that feedback from the stakeholders is always appreciated. It does not mean, of course, that the legislators will choose to follow the policies that the stakeholders pursue. However, it is always important to see the issue from the perspective of as many stakeholders as possible, to also have a clear picture as a legislator. Of course, there are from you know, the events, for instance, that were already organized by some of the stakeholders. There are some concerns that are being voiced by the industry, and of course, I mean, it is only logical that they are afraid of over-regulation, and that they are afraid that innovation would no longer be possible if we have a regulation that you know, restricts them in developing artificial intelligence, etc. However, to these concerns, I can say that it is not the purpose of the legislation whatsoever. It is not my purpose either, as a person who plans to work on the AI legislation. The purpose of, you know, of the legislation, as how I see it, is to set the ethical standards in using artificial intelligence in Europe. And as we can see with the GDPR, for instance, Europe has a huge political influence across the globe. And these ethical standards then can be adopted also by other countries around the world, so that we basically set the good example. And the intention is basically not to restrict development, if I can a bit simplify where the legislation goes, but really to see, you know, what to which extent the use of artificial intelligence brings not only opportunities, but also to what extent it brings some challenges and some risks. And the legislation works with a concept of risk, and those applications of artificial intelligence that would pose a risk, a high risk, which, I mean, some of that I have, some of the applications or type of applications which I personally see as high risk, I already named in my introductory speech, like use by the police forces, use by HR departments to screen CVs, or at the university to admit students to be or candidates to become students at a university, and the list, of course, goes on. There, we need mechanisms so that we are able to make sure that these systems do not impose discrimination on the society. They need to be transparent so that they can be audited. And we need to set a framework that makes sure that artificial intelligence is human-centric, works for the benefit of the society, and is not just a tool in the hands of the powerful who could very easily abuse it against the society. So that's my take on this.
Thank you for your reply. Thanks for bringing in the GDPR, and before it was Eliška who mentioned the proposal for the Digital Service Act and the Digital Market Act, which might be seen as another way of Europe kind of leading the way. But I think only history will judge if this was the case, that this was the correct and right approach. Though, I don't know, maybe you can share if you see some other champions in the world who could be named as kind of innovative and creative enough to face these challenges which you just described. But I don't know, maybe it's Europe for you. What would be your reply? So Sharon, you come from different environment than Europe, so.
Oh, I thought you were asking Marcel, well, who are you going to fund and champion this? Yeah, let me say that first, I think these are really good, important aim to try to come up with ethical standards. And Marcel, I think the sector, in particular, the AI industry sector that are concerned about overregulation, this is an old decades, 50, 60-year-old concern whenever there's regulation. And I really do feel the sectors that are complaining about overregulation should then just demonstrate that they indeed can work in a way which is within a human rights-based framework. And if they can't demonstrate that, it clearly shows they can't do it on their own without a little outside help. In the context of the CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, I had been urging that there be a human rights impact assessment. And I think in the AI context, human rights impact assessments are really problematic and challenging, given the monitoring, the benchmarks, the indicators. When you say audits, who's going to do it? Who has the competency? Who has the legal, technological, ethical, social science, anthropological, cultural expertise to be able to, let's say, audit Huawei, audit a European telecom? I think it's just really enormously challenging, and I'm just stating the problem. But while you were both talking, both you and Eliška, I thought about a project funded by the EU, and it was way back, like maybe 2002, 2003, 2004. And the EU funded this incredibly creative, innovative project, Grassroots, on village elections. And the key there made me think of it is that we can think of top-down policies, laws, policymakers, but we also need to think bottom up. We need to think about the ways in which more support, concrete, practical, and sustainable and effective support can be given to grassroots. And that EU project made me think of that, because it was so creative that it had to, of course, die right away and not be renewed. But it was, there was a national contest in the Chinese papers, and they said, we're going to select, I think, 10 or 12 people who have no experience with filmmaking, and we will bring them to Beijing, and they will be trained in a week to make films, videos about their local village elections. So then there was a film made about the whole process. The EU funded it. They brought them to Beijing. It is moving, it is funny, it is creative, it's amazing. And what you saw was farmers, a Tibetan kind of local guide for Tibetan sites, and they all were trained, and they made videos of what happened with their local elections. And in the process, they were not users of the tech. They were not the commodity being sold. They became the storytellers for the village. They became the documentarians. They became the commentator on the democratic process or not that was happening. They became the critics. And it was just so powerful. And I was so shocked and disappointed when those films that they made were not shown more widely. And then I realized, oh, why not? Of course not, you know. So I think that is a really good example of something that was doable, that had enormous ripple effect, and that empowered the people that were using the tech. And you don't have to look very far. There are lots. I think people tend to look at Hong Kong and think we're over, we're dead. We're not. There's oxygen. It's like gulping for the oxygen. And if you look, my favorite recent videos too, you know, are just viral online, notwithstanding censorship. And one is by the boy band, Mira, and their song, Warriors. And they just sold out 6 concerts in Hong Kong, even though everything is banned. And they begin it with a kind of whispered into the mic in English. Don't give up. That's fantastic. Don't give up. And then to just begin all in white and then end in black, which is a signature of the 2019 protest. And they say, we are warriors. We got it. Don't give up. So I'm saying there's popular culture. So there are ways in which we don't need Hollywood investment, but there are ways to support this kind of cultural space where ordinary people, or not so ordinary boy band people, you know, culture producers can produce very important, empowering culture that reinforces our language. They're keeping the Cantonese. They're echoing all of the cultural icons. It's like preserving what we can in a very difficult time. So I think we can think like that. And since the EU does have a very extensive support program, and I know everything is under scrutiny and attack now, but I think be brave, be creative, and look to the grassroots and the cultural space. That's why the film festival is so fantastic. Look to the cultural space where so much can be done because of the creativity. I'm not sure, Monika, if that answered your question.
Definitely, Sharon. Thanks so much for your positive attitude and the positive messaging. It is so important these days. And please, believe me, we are with you on Hong Kong. And here in Europe, it's not that at all. It's just that there are so many, you know, issues. There is the Belarus, there is Hong Kong, you know, there is even more going on with the COVID. And it might seem that we forgot, but no, not at all. So please, and this is the same with Taiwan, as you've mentioned before. So thank you for positive messaging and for bringing up this, you know, bottom-up approach, which has a potential these days, also given the digital technologies, to change the order if it's done properly. So we have another question, which is more future-oriented here. And it's about the future of the online world. So do you expect that the online world will be more or less safe? Will it be easier or harder to bring and update new restrictions? Given also what we've heard about the concerns of overregulation, etc. So what would be your reply to these future-looking questions? And let's start with Marcel this time to give women more time to prepare.
Well, unfortunately, my crystal ball broke yesterday. No, look, I mean, we'll be only, secure to the extent of how much the users, the citizens, will also be able to understand what they are doing online. And of course, also to the extent that the legislation will protect people's rights. So these two things need to work together. There is no magical solution. One cannot solve the other. If the other doesn't work, then the whole thing does not work, and we cannot count on being safe online. So we spoke a lot about legislation so far, about artificial intelligence, about the Digital Services Act, and so on. But also we need to keep in mind that the digital skills of people is really key in order to keep ourselves safe online. So it is not only about, having information technology experts, because that is the industry of the future and everyone will want to be an IT expert because that's where you will get job. It is also because that as a random Joe, when you walk on the street, when you go into a store, when you shop online, when you discuss something on social networks, when you go to your internet bank accounting, all these activities we are subject to technology, and we need to understand what not only the opportunities, but also the challenges and the risks that come with the technology in question are there. So legislation and digital skills.
Okay, it's clear enough. Thanks for bringing again the role of education and the critical thinking and kind of self-awareness. But it's also about the accountability of and responsibility of those who are producing the content online, isn't it? I don't know, Eliška, you've mentioned it before. You don't want to bash the platforms, but what's your view of the future on the internet?
Not that I don't want to bash them, I just want to bash everyone equally. That was just a joke. I have to admit, despite the fact that we saw very difficult years for digital rights or human rights online, and also in terms of your previous question regarding different very dangerous legislative proposals popping up constantly, because to regulate online platforms has become sort of a race among not only member states in the EU, and despite the ongoing harmonization process in the EU, by the way, we still see national legal proposals wanting to regulate platforms coming up, but also around the world. The recent example of India, which is a very tricky law from the perspective of human rights, and other countries. So I think that I want to be a bit, despite all of it, cautiously optimistic. And indeed, technology won't go anywhere. But I will connect it actually with my first experience with the One World Festival. And I had this great opportunity to participate in its Czech edition, where I was the part of the debate after the movie Gen Z, which is precisely about these upcoming or already here, the generation who are also sometimes or often called digital natives, who grew up with this reality that we are now trying to, that we are facing the consequences of. And I think that on one hand, their awareness, which is much bigger than what it was for our generations, and also their sense of empathy and that incredible source of information and the flow of information they are being subjected to on everyday basis since their day one. Obviously, it has its dark side, which is certainly there. But I think that they understand, or I want to believe, despite the common misconceptions about these upcoming generations, how responsible they are. And, I think that they understand the context of technology much better. And I think that also they can approach technology responsibly. And I think it's in the hands of the current legislators to establish the ground that they can build up upon, because it doesn't stop with DSA or DMA or any kind of regulation, and the resistance will continue because the new generation will be coming. So I think we will still, probably the best answer would be it has to get much, much worse before it will get better, because that's what we see all the time. And there will always be new challenges that we will have to tackle. But I also want to believe that we might actually stand at the beginning of a better approach to how to regulate technology and how to co-live with the technology in a way that it's beneficial to us as humans, our developments, and our human rights.
Thank you, Eliška. Now I understand what you mean cautiously optimistic. But you've mentioned new challenges ahead of us, and there is one emerging question which I actually like, and maybe this is good to pose it almost at the end of our discussion, and this is about some new technologies. Are you aware about some new technologies that are being developed and that regular citizens should be worried about, concerned about? And are there maybe some which are already used in some countries which will be then deployed into others? Is there any of this risk? Can you maybe bring this up for the audience? It's a very interesting question. Sharon, maybe you know something because you are in the other parts of the world. So
yeah, a couple of things. One is in my next lifetime, I really want to be a scientist. It's too late in this one, but I'm not a technologist. But I think for the question, there are communities that are tracking and monitoring and evaluating not only the new technologies, but actually are trying to create alternatives, which I don't understand all of the tech, but I think there are technology projects that are trying to envision other spaces where we're not users, where we have more autonomy, where we have more control over our own data. And that really happens at a very deep structural level of these alternatives. There's been in the works for some time now, some efforts to the creator of the World Wide Web is actually, was involved and been talking about for some time an alternative to the World Wide Web. So anyway, I'm just saying that in the tech space, there are lots of these kinds of efforts, but two specific communities for the question. That's a very important question. And that those of us who are not technologists can draw on is the SIF, the Stockholm Internet Freedom, the forum that just concluded. There were lots of sessions on technology and new technologies, and that was really great resource, including LGBT activists and feminists who are creating their own platforms and creating their own secure spaces, which that are interactive online, that bleeds into offline, and so I think there's lots of very exciting work done on that. The other space is the Internet Freedom Community, loosely describing a community of technologists, activists, capacity builders, funders. There's a loose community. And June 7th through that whole week, the annual RightsCon is going to be convening. And in RightsCon, anyone can go, yay! And access is really important. A lot of that work is people can go there and start learning. As Marcel says, we need to learn and stay up on the tech. And RightsCon, with thousands of opportunities to just join in and listen, I think that is a really important online digital opportunity, where in the past we had to figure out who could we send, the one body we could send. But now we can send the whole team because we're all going to be just online participating. So I think those are great resources and spaces to follow. And if I can just add one line to the future, I think there will be a post-COVID future in some formulation. And I think the one danger there that we face is the danger of the normalization of this kind of surveillance and biometric tracking during this period, where people are used to saying, it's okay to take my temperature. It's okay to know through contact tracing who I talk to. And I think that is going to be, Marcel said we need to have digital security awareness. And I think one of the challenges there is the normalization of a degree of intrusiveness into our privacy and into our interactions and into our communications that has become normalized during COVID. And so I think we have a challenge there, how to step back from that and say, no, you can't take my temperature. No, you can't know who I spoke. I think there's got to be some way to address that.
Thank you, Sharon. And I got a signal from the backstage that we don't have much time left. So I think that I won't let Eliška and Marcel to come in with their new technologies assessment unless you desperately want to share any. No?
Well, there is one thing that I wanted to say, if we still have some time. I would totally encourage people to work with technology that is decentralized, like a social network, a Mastodon, or a site for sharing, not a site, but a decentralized network for sharing videos, which is called PeerTube, or any communication tool like the Matrix, which is decentralized, etc. But what I and this is also that the Digital Markets Act as a legislation can help with, because it can set the rules on the market so that even these can compete against the so-called gatekeepers, those huge, large platforms that are dominant on the market. But there's one thing I wanted to add, which is triggered by what Eliška said. When I spoke about legislation that is part of the solution of being safe online, I also need to add that it must be the right legislation. It's about legislation that protects fundamental rights. Unfortunately, we also see a lot of legislation proposals that are going in the wrong direction, and not only in the authoritarian regimes, but also in the European Union, like the system of a chat control, with the idea that law enforcement should be able to basically look into people's conversations because there may be something illegal. These things will never make us safe. They will make us unsafe. So that's what I wanted to add.
Okay, thanks for this warning. Important to mention that there are also attempts in the democratic systems to introduce non-democratic norms. And thanks for the invitation to explore the decentralized technologies. I think it's very important for all of us and for the audience. Eliška, do you have something to add, some last word?
I probably, one thing, since RightsCon was mentioned, come to RightsCon, which is one of the biggest, the biggest digital rights conference, which will start already very, very soon. So please check out Access Now website. And indeed, if you're more interested in these topics, it's a community which is very much centered around digital rights and how to protect them. When you ask about the technology, I immediately had the most depressing topic in my mind, which is probably not the great way how to conclude this debate. And that's, of course, the spyware firms that are often exporting technology, such as very infamous Pegasus malware that was also used to target and kill journalists. So this is a challenge that we constantly grapple with, and the member states of the European Union have a lot to do with often certifying those technologies and letting them to circulate in the market, which is another very, the topic of export controls, which my colleagues at Access Now work on very intensely. It's a cybersecurity topic rather than freedom of expression topic. But, for someone who was cautiously optimistic 5 minutes ago, this is quite a U-turn to go to. But otherwise, I definitely agree with what Marcel has just mentioned. And also about the decentralized platforms and the decentralized communication platforms that are out there. So again, that goes back to the issue: explore, don't stick to the obvious, and don't think that you don't have options. So that would be from me. Thank you.
Thank you to Eliška, and thank you all. I think that we've heard enough about the current and future challenges, but also about the current and possibly future solutions to these. And with the smart scientists, which are then advising and listened by the responsible politicians, and with this vibrant and dynamic civil society, which you, some of you are representing tonight, I have a big hope that we will overcome all of these threats which we've defined and indicated tonight. So now this is my role to invite the audience, and those of you who are watching are registered at the One World Festival and are based in Belgium, to follow the screening of the movie, which has been mentioned several times already tonight. The movie is titled Coded Bias, and this is from the director Shalini Kantaya, and it is a co-production of China, South Africa, UK, and USA. And it's about the biases and prejudices which are transferred from the real world into the online world through the artificial intelligence. And it is about the consequences which it could have. So it will be a nice conclusion of our discussion today. Thank you again to all the great panelists for joining, and thanks to the audience in Belgium and maybe in some other countries across the world for listening to us. Thank you and have a nice evening.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for having me.
Thank you very much for having me. Bye.
Ahoj, tak všichni online?
Já jo.
Taky.
A ty, babi?
Babi,
Musíš tam na to kliknout. Ne, na to
babi,
druhý.
musíš tam na tu ikonku.
Sluchátko, babi. Vypadáváš.